January 2016, Los Angeles. The ballroom lights are blinding. Gold statues shimmer across linen-covered tables. Cameras pivot like searchlights hunting a reaction. Leonardo DiCaprio sits perfectly still as his name echoes through the Dolby Theater. And the Oscar goes to Leonardo DiCaprio. The applause detonates. For over 2 decades, this moment had been building: nominations, near misses, headlines asking why he hadn't won yet. The industry narrative had turned into mythology, and now, finally, the story was complete. He stands, calm, measured, no visible explosion of relief, just a nod, a controlled smile, and that familiar walk to the stage. You can almost feel it, the shift in the room, not celebration, completion. The camera lingers on him longer than necessary, because in Hollywood this is usually the beginning of something louder. Bigger roles, more interviews, magazine covers, back-to-back prestige films. When an actor wins an Oscar after a long chase, the machine accelerates. But something else was forming behind the applause. Within months of that historic win for The Revenant, DiCaprio did something Hollywood rarely sees at that altitude. He stepped back. No immediate prestige follow-up, no aggressive awards campaign the following year, no oversaturation talk show circuit. The industry waited for the victory lap. It never came. Instead, there was space. Silence. And that silence felt intentional. From 2013 to 2016, DiCaprio had been everywhere: The Wolf of Wall Street, global premieres, environmental speeches at the United Nations, award campaigns, high-profile collaborations with Martin Scorsese and Alejandro González Iñárritu. His visibility was constant, his intensity relentless. By traditional industry logic, the next move after winning the Academy Award should have been dominance. Instead, he recalibrated. Years passed between projects. Public appearances became selective, interviews were sparse. He wasn't disappearing entirely, he was controlling exposure. And in Hollywood, control is everything. You have to understand the system to see why this mattered. Studios depend on familiarity, agencies push momentum, publicists fight for sustained relevance. The algorithm of fame rewards constant presence. If you're not visible, you risk becoming replaceable. But DiCaprio had reached a rare tier, a place where scarcity could be leveraged. There's a psychological pressure that comes with overexposure. Audiences begin to anticipate you, then predict you, then tire of you. For many stars, the greatest threat isn't scandal. It's saturation. After years of playing operatic, high-intensity characters, Jordan Belfort's manic greed, Hugh Glass's raw survival fury, the risk wasn't failure. It was predictability. And predictability erodes mystique. Somewhere in that post-Oscar quiet, DiCaprio appeared to understand something few actors do at their peak: dominance has a shelf life. The industry rewards hunger, but it also consumes it. So instead of feeding the machine, he slowed the machine. He didn't retreat into obscurity, he curated presence, environmental activism, strategic partnerships, development deals simmering quietly behind the scenes. When he did reemerge in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, it wasn't as a man chasing validation. It was as a fully self-aware veteran playing a fading star. That casting wasn't accidental. It was meta and powerful. By waiting, he shifted perception. He wasn't the actor desperate to capitalize on an Oscar win. He was the actor who didn't need to. In Hollywood psychology, need is weakness, availability is leverage lost. The less he appeared, the more weight his name carried. Studios began to recalibrate around him instead of the other way around. But here, the question that lingers beneath the strategy. Was this purely calculated, or was it survival? Because fame at that scale doesn't just exhaust careers. It distorts identity. And sometimes stepping back isn't about power. It's about preservation. As the applause of 2016 faded into memory, something more profound was happening behind closed doors, a quiet confrontation with what constant visibility costs a person. And that confrontation would quietly reshape not just his career, but how Hollywood understands power itself. The cameras never really turn off. Even when the stage lights dim, even when the Oscar statue sits untouched on a shelf somewhere in a guarded hillside home, the industry keeps watching. Executives track momentum, studios forecast value curves, agencies whisper about heat. After The Revenant, Leonardo DiCaprio's heat was at its peak. And that's exactly when heat becomes dangerous. In Hollywood, visibility operates like currency but also like exposure to the sun. Too little and you fade, too much and you burn. From 1997's Titanic onward, DiCaprio had lived under an intensity few actors survive. Global hysteria, tabloid fixation, the heartthrob label that threatened to flatten him into something disposable. He spent years clawing his way out of that perception, choosing auteurs, morally complicated characters, psychological depth. He built credibility the hard way. But by the mid-2010s, another threat had emerged. Overseriousness fatigue. When an actor becomes synonymous with intensity, with awards, ambition, physical transformation, prestige collaborations, the audience begins to anticipate the performance before it happens. They don't watch to discover, they watch to confirm. That's the moment mystique starts dissolving. And DiCaprio had been operating at full throttle for years. Django Unchained, The Great Gatsby, The Wolf of Wall Street, The Revenant, each role louder than the last, each campaign heavier, each press cycle more exhaustive. Imagine the psychological toll of sustaining that level of scrutiny. You can almost feel it, the repetition of hotel rooms, interview chairs, flashing bulbs, the same questions asked in different accents across continents. The subtle expectation that you must always escalate, always deliver something more. More extreme, more transformative, more award-worthy. What happens when escalation becomes the only direction available? You either explode or you step off the track. Some actors don't realize they're trapped in the cycle until it's too late. They chase relevance, they overcommit, they flood the market with projects, and slowly the audience adjusts. The once rare presence becomes routine. But DiCaprio did something counterintuitive. He allowed anticipation to rebuild. Between The Revenant 2015 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 2019, there was a 4-year gap without a leading theatrical role. In modern Hollywood terms, that's an eternity, especially for someone at the top. During that time, the industry shifted dramatically, streaming surged, franchise universes tightened their grip. New stars emerged through algorithm-driven visibility. Social media demanded constant engagement. He didn't chase any of it. No superhero pivot. No prestige streaming series. No frantic public reinvention. Instead, he leaned into stillness. Psychologically, stillness can be terrifying for performers. When you're not working, doubt creeps in, relevance anxiety whispers, the fear that the world is moving on without you. But stillness can also be recalibration. It forces clarity. By reducing output, DiCaprio increased selectivity. Scripts had to justify breaking silence. Directors had to align with long-term narrative. The choice to appear became meaningful again. And meaning is rare in an oversaturated culture. This wasn't just about resting. It was about narrative control. Hollywood runs on story, not just on screen but off it. The overdue Oscar winner, the box office king, the aging action hero. Once you're labeled, the industry packages you accordingly. DiCaprio quietly refused new labels. He didn't transform into Oscar winner Leonardo DiCaprio. He didn't become a brand ambassador for prestige. He stayed undefined. That ambiguity is powerful. Because when audiences can't fully predict you, they stay curious. And curiosity sustains longevity. By 2019, when he returned as Rick Dalton, an insecure, fatting television star in Tarantino's Elegy to Old Hollywood, the casting felt layered, almost autobiographical, an actor known for dominance playing a man terrified of irrelevance. The performance worked because the gap before it made it resonate. Viewers hadn't been saturated with him, they leaned forward again. Absence had reset appetite. But there's another layer beneath strategy. Control. When an actor becomes too available, studios dictate timelines, release calendars shape choices, momentum pressures decisions. By stepping back at his peak, DiCaprio subtly reversed that dynamic. Studios waited for him. Directors aligned schedules around him. Scarcity shifted leverage. And in an industry built on supply and demand, reducing supply can quietly increase power. But here's the deeper question. Was this model unique to him, or was he tapping into an unspoken truth about Hollywood's life cycle? Because he wasn't the only one who discovered that silence could be strategic. There's a pattern here. A pattern of major figures who stepped away not because they were forced to, but because they understood something about fame most people never do. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Hollywood has a rhythm. It builds you. It markets you. It monetizes you. And then if you let it, it replaces you. But every so often, someone interrupts that rhythm. Not with scandal. Not with collapse. But with restraint. Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't the first to recognize that stepping back could recalibrate power, but he executed it at a particularly volatile time in the industry. Because by the late 2010s, Hollywood had changed. The old studio system was dissolving into streaming wars, franchises were becoming industrial machines, actors were no longer just performers, they were content engines, visibility wasn't seasonal anymore, it was constant. Social media erased distance between star and audience. The mystique that once defined movie stars was evaporating. And mystique is what built Hollywood in the first place. In the golden age, stars weren't accessible. They were curated, protected, mythologized. The space between the public and the performer created fascination. You couldn't scroll into their kitchens. You couldn't livestream their opinions. By choosing selective visibility in a hypervisible era, DiCaprio was unintentionally echoing that older model of stardom. And the industry noticed. Because scarcity changes negotiation dynamics. When an actor appears in multiple projects every year, studios know there are alternatives. But when an actor releases a film only every few years and those films consistently carry weight, the dynamic shifts. The project becomes an event. The actor becomes a gatekeeper. This isn't just theory, it's reputation economics. Think about the psychology of demand. If something is always available, it feels abundant. If it appears rarely, it feels valuable. DiCaprio's filmography began to resemble a curated archive rather than an ongoing stream. Each role felt deliberate, each collaboration signaled intention. And intention builds trust. Directors like Martin Scorsese didn't just cast him because of fame, they built long-term creative alliances. When you work less frequently, you protect the integrity of those alliances. You avoid diluting your creative identity. But here, where it becomes more than career management, there's an emotional cost to being perpetually visible. Constant exposure compresses identity. You start performing even when you're not performing. Interviews require versions of yourself. Public appearances demand calibration, even philanthropy becomes scrutinized. Silence interrupts that compression. It allows identity to stretch back out. You can imagine the psychological recalibration that happens when the red carpets stop, when the press tour pause, when the daily speculation about your next move fades. It creates room. Room to choose rather than react. And choice is power. This pattern extends beyond DiCaprio. Daniel Day-Lewis famously disappeared between roles, protecting intensity through absence. Joaquin Phoenix withdrew from mainstream cycles, re-emerging unpredictably. Even figures like Cameron Diaz stepped away entirely at one point, citing the exhaustion of constant production schedules. These weren't failures. They were recalibrations. Hollywood doesn't openly encourage this behavior because the business thrives on output. But privately, executives understand the phenomenon. Audience fatigue is real. The more you see a face, the less impact it carries. By returning in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, DiCaprio didn't just deliver a performance, he reintroduced himself. There's a difference. Reintroduction carries intrigue, it invites reassessment. And the timing was surgical. The industry was mid-transition, streaming giants were rewriting distribution rules, the theatrical experience was becoming less certain. Amid that uncertainty, a DiCaprio film still felt like a cultural anchor. That's leverage. But leverage only works if it's intentional. If absence is forced, it signals decline. If absence is chosen, it signals control. The distinction is subtle but powerful. And this is where the psychology deepens. Because stepping back at your peak requires something rare in Hollywood. Resisting the applause. Most careers chase validation, the next award, the next box office milestone, the next headline declaring relevance. To pause after finally winning the one award that eluded you for decades. That requires confidence bordering on detachment. And detachment changes perception. The industry began to see DiCaprio less as an actor competing within the system, and more as a figure operating slightly above it. That's not arrogance. It's positioning. But every strategy carries risk. What if the audience forgets? What if momentum evaporates? What if the silence is misinterpreted as decline? These are the fears that keep most stars running. Yet somehow the silence held. And when he returned again with Killers of the Flower Moon, the weight of that return felt intentional, not obligatory. Which raises a bigger question. Did his pause quietly redefine what Hollywood power looks like in the modern era? Because power used to mean visibility. Now it might mean restraint. And if that's true, then the loudest move in Hollywood might be the one no one hears coming. By the time Killers of the Flower Moon entered production, the industry had shifted again. Streaming platforms were spending billions, theaters were fighting for survival, franchises dominated headlines, the definition of a movie star was under quiet debate. And yet, when Leonardo DiCaprio's name appeared alongside Martin Scorsese's on that project, something unusual happened. The conversation slowed. Not exploded, slowed. Executives leaned in, analysts recalculated, audiences paid attention without being prompted. Because by then, a DiCaprio project no longer felt like content. It felt like a decision. That's the transformation. Early in his career, he fought to be taken seriously after Titanic. Mid-career, he fought for the Oscar that symbolized legitimacy. Post-Oscar, he stopped fighting altogether. And that's when power matured. There's a psychological concept called strategic withdrawal. In high-pressure systems, constant participation reduces perceived authority. Leaders who speak less but decisively often carry more influence than those who comment on everything. Hollywood is no different. When DiCaprio reduced his visibility, he unintentionally adopted the posture of someone who didn't need to compete for attention. And that posture reshaped negotiations. Studios weren't just offering roles, they were offering alignment. Distributors weren't simply buying films, they were buying events tied to his presence. The pause had filtered his career into something rarer, legacy-driven curation. Look at the pattern. After the Oscar, he didn't pivot to safe blockbusters. He didn't chase franchise immortality. He didn't flood streaming platforms for visibility insurance. Instead, he chose projects rooted in directors with established voices, complex historical narratives, layered characters. He began operating less like a star seeking longevity and more like a custodian of a carefully assembled filmography. That shift matters. Because longevity in Hollywood isn't just about staying famous. It's about staying selective. The industry quietly recalibrates around those who refuse urgency. When you're not rushing to release something every year, your participation becomes a variable executives must account for. It builds gravity. And gravity changes the room. When DiCaprio walks onto a set now, he isn't the young prodigy proving himself. He isn't the overdue Oscar nominee chasing validation. He's a stabilizing force, someone whose presence signals intention. That evolution was born in silence. But here's the deeper layer. Silence protects identity. Fame fragments people. The public constructs versions of you, activist, environmentalist, award chaser, collaborator, recluse. Over time, those fragments compete. By reducing exposure, DiCaprio limited how many new fragments were created. He controlled narrative sprawl. In an era where social media rewards constant commentary, he remained largely absent from it. No daily reactions, no algorithm-driven engagement cycles. That absence preserved mystique, something increasingly rare in modern celebrity culture. And mystique isn't just aesthetic. It's psychological leverage. When audiences can't fully map you, they project depth. When they don't hear from you constantly, your rare appearances feel deliberate. Deliberation builds authority. Authority builds longevity. This is where the broader pattern emerges. Hollywood once defined power as ubiquity, being everywhere at once. Red carpets, late-night interviews, franchise universes. But ubiquity dilutes. In the streaming age, attention is fragmented. Content floods timelines hourly. The more visible you are, the more you risk blending into the stream. DiCaprio's slowdown resisted that tide. He became intermittent in a culture addicted to immediacy. And intermittence stands out. Think about it. When his name headlines a new project announcement, it trends without spectacle. There's no overexposure fatigue. There's no sense of again already. There's curiosity. That curiosity is currency. But none of this works without one crucial element. Trust. Audiences trust that his choices mean something, that if he's appearing, the project carries weight. That trust wasn't built through noise. It was built through restraint. And restraint is difficult in a system that rewards constant output. Which leads to the final shift. By stepping back at his peak, DiCaprio quietly demonstrated that modern Hollywood power doesn't come from dominating every cycle. It comes from shaping cycles. He isn't reacting to industry trends anymore. He's choosing when to intersect with them. That's a different tier of influence. And it raises one final, unsettling thought. If silence can build this much leverage, what happens when more A-list actors begin to adopt the same strategy? Does the industry slow down? Or does it recalibrate entirely around those who refuse to be endlessly available? Because if that future takes hold, the loudest careers in Hollywood won't belong to the most visible. They'll belong to the most deliberate.